Welcome back to the Florida History Podcast. I'm Kartik Krishnaiyer.
And I'm Robert Buccellato.
And Robert, let's pick up on our American Revolution series with after the prisoners that we talked about in a previous episode from Charleston were brought to St. Augustine. There were actually elections for the first time in Florida under Spanish rule or British rule. East Florida elected a provincial legislature by popular ballot. Now, before we think this was some wonderful exercise in democracy, let me point out the election was held throughout the colony among landowners who possessed at least 500 acres in their name. So those people were able to vote on a 19-man assembly, which was seated, and again, I said man, not 19-person, that was that pledged allegiance to King George III, and they were seated in early 1781. This legislature, because it was made up of landowners, wanted to impose a harsh slave code. This is the very first thing they wanted to do. And this foreshadowed what would happen in the southern colonies of the United States once they started electing state legislatures in Georgia and South Carolina and Virginia and in North Carolina. Governor Tonyn, however, was not happy about this, even though earlier in our series we talk about this in the book. He evolved on this issue. He himself had been a slave owner. He himself had been very reluctant to have any freed blacks in the colony initially. But by this time, the war is not going great, right, for the British. It's become a war of attrition. He felt like that they needed to continue arming African Americans, and he wanted to continue to have free blacks roaming the streets in St. Augustine. So the legislature compromised with him. So this decision not to impose a harsh slave code was also related to the growing abolitionist movement back in Britain, and the practical concerns about identifying who was a slave and who wasn't, because there were so many free blacks roaming the streets.
Which, if there's anybody listening that is interested in the very complex history involving the abolition of slavery in Great Britain, I highly recommend the drama Saving Grace, which deals very deep into the tangled web and intrigue that was involved over in the Parliament side of things in London to eventually not only eliminate slavery in the motherland, but throughout the vast British Empire, including Florida and the Caribbean.
Yeah, and so you had a growing abolitionist movement in Britain. You had many of the loyalists who were merchants and shopkeepers in St. Augustine, who weren't the people who owned 500 acres of land, that were able to vote for this provincial legislature and run and get seated in the legislature, saying, well, wait a second, we fought with these free blacks, they protected the city, and the slaves actually built the defenses or rebuilt the fortifications and defenses of St. Augustine. So we don't want to do this. So that was a major consideration. Now, in the meantime, as you've written about in our forthcoming work that's coming out, the Spanish, by this time in 1781, have liberated or have recaptured or conquered, whatever term you want to use, West Florida. So there seemed to be a fear that the Spanish were preparing to invade East Florida, and that there were Spanish spies roaming the streets of St. Augustine that were regularly delivering intelligence reports to Spanish officials in Pensacola, which they had just conquered and captured, as we talked about in several previous episodes, and in Havana. And there was this Menorcan community that I talked about in a previous episode that had relocated to St. Augustine from New Smyrna, who were, of course, Catholics. And so you had the Spanish saying, we need to be able to deliver holy oil and holy and church-related items to the Menorcan community in St. Augustine. So basically, you have Spanish spies ostensibly coming to deliver holy oil and other items to the Menorcans, who are gathering intelligence information. So at this point, Robert, there is a fear that there might be either a Spanish attack coming from the west, or there might be an American French attack, a Franco-American attack coming from the north. This General Assembly that was elected ends up getting dismissed by Tonyn. Not only was he unhappy about their and this, I guess, is a noble side of him, potential slave code, but then he figures they're going to cause problems if we have one of these invasions. But oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So wait a minute. You're telling me that there was a Florida governor who disagreed vehemently with his legislature, and they couldn't agree on anything, and the legislature left early? What a shocking development.
Yeah, and I've seen obviously most recently with Danny Perez and Ron DeSantis, but I've got to point out, I've got to talk about the 2001 or 2. Which session was it? Was it 1 or 2? I think it was 2001 when John McKay, who was the president of the Senate, had a visceral hatred for Jeb Bush. McKay was a Republican senator from Bradenton, from Manatee County, and he decided to and he had bottled up Bush's tax cuts and all of these things in the Senate, so nothing was passing. Bush was in alliance with the House Speaker Tom Feeney, who is a particularly despicable character, I will say, in recent Florida history. Tom Feeney. If you don't remember Tom Feeney, look him up. And ended up losing his congressional seat that he drew for himself since he was Speaker of the House in the Jack Abramoff scandal. He was closely connected to Abramoff. Lost his seat in 2008, I guess it would have been. But Feeney was aligned with Bush, so they pass everything. Here is what is really, really interesting. McKay decides around noon on the final day of session, without any indication. He had obviously cleared this with the other Republican leaders, and the Democrats were obviously in on it. Decides to adjourn sine die, killing every single bill. I was there in the chamber. I was in the House chamber, actually. Sorry, not in the chamber, but in the gallery. I was in the House gallery when the message came from the Senate that they'd adjourned sine die, and Speaker Feeney very stubbornly says, the Florida Senate has abdicated its responsibilities to the people, to we the people. All this. Feeney, if you don't know, was one of the forerunners of the Tea Party movement. Also,
he was.
Yes. So he gives all this nonsensical rhetoric.
Bluster.
Yeah, all this bluster. And he keeps the House in session till like 2 a.m., passing things that are not going to go anywhere. It was pathetic. So, so this happened in 1781. And basically, in London, they weren't happy that Tonyn dissolved the assembly, so the assembly was reconvened in January of 1782 and lasted until March of 1784, shortly before the colony was turned over to Spain as a result of the Treaty of Paris. Now, so that was Florida's first experiment with democracy. Tonyn was prickly as always, but you could say he probably did the right thing when it came to the slavery issue. Now, so let's talk now, Robert, about the safe haven, because what happened following the British defeat at Yorktown is loyalists began flooding into East Florida. In 1782 alone, over 6,000 refugees fled to East Florida. The assumption in this period was that East Florida would remain a part of the British Empire, even though West Florida had obviously fallen to the Spanish by this time. Oh, go ahead.
They were all, I was going to say, they were all flooding predominantly in the St. Augustine area.
Right.
And 6,000 might not seem like a lot to us today, but St. Augustine, I mean, imagine having your population of your community triple. And
actually, pick up in a minute, because I'm going to give you the actual numbers. So the population in and around St. Augustine, as we wrote about in the book, swelled to 15,000 by the end of 1782, which was 5 times what the population had been when the war started in 1775. So anyway, Robert, let's pick up on that in a future episode. So we'll be back next week with another new edition of the Florida History Podcast as we continue our narrative about the fortress colony of East Florida between 1780 and 1784.